إيه يخصتيني تشتكت يوهان شقوا يا خانا أختوسكو أداية جكختوني وكنخ قشتسيني أت جاغدخ كوخ يا أخليل كخني أداتو يجيوني وجاكوت كو أكوشخت جاغو أكوشخت هيلتاتش كشنيجي قا و أديتكي واسا أتكقوني هستو إين وشاختو أسكو تلينخ يوهان كينخ يتو ويخطنك أقا أداية جكختوني يا أختو أسكو يستيني يا دعا وكخشتسيني أدوسا دو تواسكو وش كيقانخ ياتا وشوخوا أختو أسكو يتو تلينخ يوهان دوك ياتا
Telefoon ede idoch och.
تلفون خيتي الدخوخ جاكوت خو ياتا
Nana i wake.
نانا إي ويخ جاكوت خو ياتا
Du'in kananik.
Du'in kananik busy chatzati.
دو إن كاننيك بزي خدستي أدوسا كقوتو ياتا
Du'in kakwanik ita.
دو إن كقوتنيك إيتا هوجي آي أدوسا
تخا بزيخ كوخيخ
تاخا بزيخ كليخ يا أوه Charlie تقوات قشي دوسا قا چاني تقوات قا سنوبي هخواسكو واسا سنوخي قشي snuhui duasago at. Okay, so this is where we start, is with this document from long ago that was worked on by Nora Marks Downhauer, whose Tlingit name was Cheuchne. She and Duchuch Huayinak had secured permission from Charles Schultz himself to translate these into Tlingit. As far as I know, they only did one, though. So we have read it out loud. So our translation exercise tonight, maybe what we'll end up doing is a bit of a retype of this. So let me get myself ready. Where did I put this? Okay, hold on. Okay, so now we'll switch to a document. So here we are, and we'll do one line at a time. That's a, should say telephone. Ede. So, as we approach some Tlingit language, what's your process for starting to interpret what this is? And some of you, as far as like how we're going to approach this, those of you who've been studying, if this is not your first time taking advanced Tlingit, you have to wait for the others to answer first. So you're going to have to, you might have to sit on your hands. And so, yeah, what is your approach when you encounter some Tlingit? How do you begin your process of interpreting it?
I look for things that I recognize.
Look for things you recognize, okay?
I go for the verb.
Go for the
Try
verb.
to figure out what the verb is.
Okay.
I
Anyone?
read the whole thing as fast as I can because, you know, when you're talking about clinker brain and English brain,
Mm-hmm.
then that gives me a clinker brain head start, and then I start like these other guys are saying.
Yeah, there is, and there's something to that. So, some of us, as we get more language acquired, we sort of look at things sort of and start chunking them up. As we go farther, we might just sort of like go through the whole thing and then come back and see. It's like, I do believe as you learn Tlingit, you do reach a process where you can't translate it fast enough and your interpretation in Tlingit is faster than translating it. So I know this because there's been times where I would listen to someone speak and then someone would ask me what they said. And I was like, well, I know what they said, but I can't really tell you. But then like an hour later, I said, okay, now let me tell you what they said. And so it was difficult to sort of begin to transition back and forth. But I think as we're learning, a lot of us, we do a lot of back and forth. But we have some exercises through this year to sort of prepare us for just moving into Tlingit more completely. Okay?
Thanks to all of our work on verbs and understanding verbs, I was able to see the verb root here and go to the verb database and see that that means to summon or to call. So that was like my first move.
Okay. So we could sort of separate this. So like one approach we might take, let me make this like a little bigger. Hold on. So we might say, okay, we've got telephone ʼéináx, ʼéináx. So let's get us to everything but the verb. So telephone's an English word. What about ʼéináx?
From the mouth?
Close.
To the mouth.
To the mouth.
Towards.
And towards the mouth of what?
The telephone.
Yes. Towards the mouth of the telephone. So we might just sort of get us like towards the mouth of the telephone. And now we get to ʼéináx. So one approach could be, okay, I can now separate this into the stem and the prefix. Boom. That is a very essential skill to say, okay, because once I see the stem, I could look up the root. And so what would the difference be between stem and root? I don't know how much we've talked about that.
Stem can be modified in all kinds of ways.
The stem can be modified, yes.
I feel like the root is usually long and low, and the stem can be any various configuration.
Okay. It's in the neighborhood, but maybe a little different.
Question, when you said the stem can be modified, does that mean the root cannot be modified?
Well, okay, let's go here. So when I say the root, I am talking about the meaning of chuch. So the root equals meaning, the stem equals vowel. That's it. That's everything. So for example, you could say gut. It's a very common verb root. What does it mean?
To go.
Go. Walk, specifically. One person.
Or go. And now your stem options are, you can say gut, gut, gut. That's what the stem is. It says what is the vowel will be one of three ways. Short high, long low. Those are your three options. So the stem always talks about what is the vowel doing. And the root is saying, what is this thing? It's gut. So you have to have that starting point. So what's the consonants? What's the vowels? And then what is the meaning, right? So here, chuch, that is our root. And so usually what we do, stem variation is one of the kind of last steps that I usually take in terms of like really sort of focusing on it, but we will be focusing on it. It's prescribed by the stem type, the conjugation type, and the verb mode, which we'll get to all of that as well. But for now, we can separate. There's the stem, there's the there's the prefix. So we start to do this so we can, when we look at the stem, we'll say, okay, I want to know the meaning and I want to see eventually, like, what is, this is a long low, you know, because we see it, long and low. That's what the vowel is. How many things are in the prefix?
The I is the you singular, the pronoun.
There might, yes. So then we can say, okay, so there's you as an, it's a second person object.
Object and then
Well, it's happening to you. Someone's doing this verb to you. And then de.
It's the subject.
Someone.
It's fourth person.
Write it as someone. And then I interpret it as either people or just it happens. And that's a fourth person human subject. What is missing though that has to be there?
No classifier.
Yes. So we also have to be able to spot what kinds of things we don't hear or see, but that we want to note when we pull it apart. So classifier, 0.
Would you also say that there's no conjugation, or is it not included?
It's not included here, and we couldn't know it from this information. This is an imperfective. We know it's an imperfective because there's no conjugation stuff that pops up. So it has to be an imperfective, at least as far as we could tell.
Does it always do the same pattern where it's like object, subject, and then classifying verb? It's always that way?
Cannot move. It cannot move. And so it's tricky to keep that in mind because the word order is different and it's also built into the verb. But now, if I say this, so here's ʼéináx, right? So if I say ʼéináx, they are summoning you. What if I said, or people are summoning you? What if I wanted to say people are summoning me? Right? And so like I can, once I learn my lists of pronouns, I could switch all of these. I could change them to whatever I want. I could say ʼéináx. What's going on now?
I'm summoning you.
I'm summoning you. Do ʼéináx chat خوخ.
Their finger,
They're summoning me with my finger, with their finger?
And that comes from a story. Like, I don't think Lingít did that a long time ago. I don't know how that, maybe it was more like this. I don't know. Okay, I gotta check the chat. Okay.
Argentine gaat kroeg.
Yeah. Argentine. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now you are being summoned to the telephone. Right? I don't know how it's, the phone's for you. That's probably where the English sort of comes from, telephone call for you or something, but in terms of how we would think about that in Lingít, you are being summoned to the mouth of the telephone. Pretty cool. Okay. Nana'i wave. What's
How
our,
come it's not telephone ʼéináx?
what's that?
How come it's not telephone ʼéináx?
Well, you are being summoned to the phone. Like, people are calling you over to the phone, which is saying you got to go to the mouth of the phone, which is saying talk into it and listen to it. And so that's how Lingít would think about it. And so if you wanted to say you're being summoned to like something, like they're calling for you, right? That's really what this verb is talking about. So let's say you were a performer and you were hanging out backstage too long and they're looking for you, right? And they're calling your name out. Someone might grab you and say, ʼéináx, wait, you're being summoned over that way. Anybody know nana'i? This is getting into the realm of like, I don't know. It's kind of an interjection, I guess. I do think it's unique in that it's hard to analyze grammatically. Na, that could be a command form. Anybody know what the na verb is in there?
Die.
Die. So na would mean, well, you'd say like, ʼéináx is how you would say, you go die. You just die, right? And that's a very harsh thing to say. I fully recognize that. So this switches over here. It's kind of like nana'i. So this is this. It's a second person thing. I'm not exactly sure how this functions. It's all languages have these things where like you can't really see the internal parts, like eko ayachwan and gunarchish. This sort of falls into that realm where you could see that like death is in there. Nana is also a noun for death. So I would say death for you. But like an equivalent, I guess, would probably be F off. Maybe that's probably your English equivalent is something along those lines. So be careful with it. It's used teasingly a lot. So nana'i weg, I guess you could say is piss off over that way. It's not the nicest thing to say, but it's also context is everything. I've been around people who are really good friends and they talk to each other in ways where if other people were listening, they might be like, oh my goodness, you talk to each other that way? So,
I was thinking something a lot less vulgar. I thought it would be related to how like juk can be used to like finish a thing or something.
yeah, it's kind of along those lines. And then we have in kananik busy chatzati.
Nora and Dick wrote it. How bad could it be? And it's nationally syndicated too.
Well, and Tlingit, like it's also like there's certain things, like I'm sure if you learned English and you saw when people start talking to each other, know each other pretty well, they'd be like, did you just call your friend like a female dog? Or, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff, and this falls into that realm where like in the culture, it's funny, but it's also like you have to know how and when to use these things. People say it to me, but usually we're all laughing. But someone, coming back to this, because another variation of this is that, which is like death for you, take it, is how I would consider it. And someone asked me, they said, what does that mean? I was like, well, it means like death for you, take it, like basically. And then someone's like, oh, because we used to say that on the playground when there's a lot of racism going on. Like these are people who grew up in a different era, right? And so there was, in that case, they probably meant it. So you can really mean it. It can be teasing. I think it's a lot like, not everybody's this way, but some people who are really good friends, they'll say F you to their friends and everybody's laughing and stuff. And so it is in that realm where there's a whole sort of thing of like cultural context, which is really important. Don't say this at ku'ik. Don't say this to your opposites if other people can hear you. But
I've been trying to figure out what the saying means because it's still like kind of used quietly and jokingly in my community. And nobody would tell me what it meant. None of like my mom's generation, none of them would tell me what it meant. And then they have a hand signal that goes with it.
yeah, it's two like this.
Yeah.
So this is ituk. So that is like stick it up your butt is really what it means. And sometimes they'll spit on it and shake it at you. And those combine. So good as cheese, Snoopy, for really showing us the way here. So they're having fun putting English in here. But in terms of like now we get a more complicated phrase, right? So this has one verb. This doesn't really have, it's a non-verbal phrase because you can't really conjugate it, I don't think. It's said, so it's one of those in the moment types of things. It is funny, but it also has serious context as well. I've probably said it to people and kind of meant it, but it was like when real serious stuff goes on, because sometimes real serious stuff does go on. Sometimes people are not nice to you, or sometimes people are, there's things just get intense. But I do think he's just kidding. But I don't know. He's a little snarky, isn't he? Okay. So, what's our approach for this one?
I think ʼéináx is a verb.
Tell them.
Yeah, so
The
this
whole
would be,
thing?
what's that?
Is the whole thing the verb? Do ʼéináx?
Yes. Well, it's okay, so this is where we get into some, this is the verb. This is the verbal phrase. And so that means there's a preverb there that affects this verb, right? So ʼéináx on its own is, anybody know what that is on its own?
Imperative.
Yes, it's a command form for tell it. Tell the information. Tell it, right? And so it depends. Like there is an object there, and the object is the information, right? And so usually it's news, some particular sort of statement or information, not specific words, right? So you could say, in this case, like tell them this thing, right? But if Snoopy was, telemarketer, telephone gete ichuch, right? So ichuch, a telemarketer is summoning you to the telephone. And in that case, you might say, yeyanascha nanai. You tell them these words, right? Go die, right? But that's if you're really anti-telemarketer. I'm not trying to say anything mean about any telemarketers who are out there. But in this case, do in ʼéináx. So to them, right? So this is the doing. So to them, tell it. And then busy chatzati.
I am busy, or I'm busy.
I am busy, right? So now, you could say ach in ʼéináx. And what would that be?
Tell it to me.
Tell it to me. Right? So now we see just sort of like getting our mind ready for what we're seeing. This is a relational pronoun, mine, your, their, our, y'all's, them all's, however we want to translate those, people's. So you could say, and you can also say this, Ka'in ʼéináx. Now what do we say?
Tell somebody. Tell it to somebody.
Yeah, or tell the people. Tell it to somebody, right? And so these fourth person ones are interesting to like interpret. Like if someone said that, I'd be like, oh, you want me to go tell everybody? Like I'm telling the people. Like now I have to make an announcement, right? Ka'in ʼéináx. Just for like one more step, ach in ʼéináx this part can be shortened. Does anybody know what it can be shortened to?
Oh,
Chan ʼéináx. This one can also be shortened. Anybody know what that would shorten to?
un.
Right? Okay. Yeah, okay.
So curious about the busy chatzati. I always thought that chatzati or sati would be like referring putting you in a classification. Because being busy doesn't seem like a group of things.
Yeah, like I have become busy. Busy is what I have become. And so this is what I would call a multilingual pun. Because there is a way to say, you could say, du inkananik, achdat at kutziti. Tell them I am busy. You could say that in Tlingit. It could also be interpreted as like, I'm important, but usually you'd say like, "Atlein yejechane," I'm really working hard, right? Or just tell them, like, if someone said that, I would just say, okay, they're busy, right? I'll go tell. But folks in the Marx family, especially, I think, were big fans of these types of things. This is what Johnny Marx used to say to me, or he'd say it to different people. And so you could say similar things in Tlingit, but saying you have become awesome. You have become really awesome. So I am becoming busy, I guess. I am busy. I don't know, it's a jokey type of way to say it. And that's what you see with the use of English here, I think.
Yeah, that confused me too, because I was thinking yati would be sort of just being, but sati is like I am becoming busy. I am. So okay, I'll take it. I believe you.
Keishi says a dot hut kudziti, I think.
Yeah, achdat at kutziti. Is that it?
Ah,
There are things around me, is really what it means.
ah.
But it usually, if someone says that, I would always interpret that as they're busy. And so it depends on the context. Like if I said, wasa'iati, and they say, achdatat kutziti. Probably say, one, right, or something, because they're saying like, it starts to lean into this I'm overwhelmed with work type of thing. But it also depends on the conversation, right? Because if it were like this and I went to someone, back in the days when there was one phone and we'd all get summoned to the phone instead of like everybody has a phone, then I might say, telephone and they say, achdatat kutziti. Do inkakwanik. That's how that conversation will go for me. That say I'm busy. I was like, okay, I'll tell him. Do inkakwanik. Add a tone mark on the verb. The verb has changed here.
The future form.
Yep.
To tell them, go tell them, will tell them.
Them.
I will tell it.
I will tell it.
You're sleeping.
You are sleeping.
Okay. And then tacha bezich kutlayech. Okay. Tacha bezich kut. Okay. So, yeah, coming back to yati, busy yati. The yati verb means to be a certain way. So you could say, but you don't see it used to describe like really states of being a whole lot. Usually you just go, there's usually a verb for all of those things. And so we do get tricked sometimes by the yati verb and the way that be works in English. For an example, someone might say, "Chat would huet." So they might say, "Chat would huet." I am tired. And then they might say, "Chat would huet yequati," or something like that. So I've seen people try to do stuff like this. So they'll add a be verb that would be being or will be, because you'll say, I will be tired. So your English brain is like, oh yeah, we need like a will be thing. And so folks will put it in there and it's like, you didn't need to add that other verb because Tlingit does not use linking verbs like English does. So like is, was, were, those link things together in different ways in English. So instead you'd say chat. Then what?
Quidlawet.
Quadriquet.
Oh, that's I was.
Wait. We will get to the future's coming. Future is coming. By the end of this semester, you should really be very good at putting together perfectives and future verbs. You should be able to look at any verb theme and construct a perfective or future out of it. So, okay, now I know that verb, I could put it in perfective in the future. Then we've got next semester to work on all the other ones. So. Okay. Okay. Snoopy leaves us with the doozy here. Fourth panel. Whew.
It's sleeping. Ta.
Well, yes, so ta can be a verb for they are sleeping. It can also be a noun. In this case, sleep. And this is very hard to tell because they are absolutely identical. You don't get that very often, but ta is probably the shortest verb. It's tied with the shortest verb. There's a couple others that are also that short. Just these single syllable, like really all you have here is the stem. That is very unusual. And so even like when you say it, I think people have to think about it for a while as they're learning Tlingit, because might say, "Dasayid da inne." What are they doing? It's a ta. And I might say, "Gusu itla ta." That's the whole answer, right? They are sleeping. So it takes 3 words in English, and you can do it in 1 in Tlingit. But in this case, this is the noun. What about cha?
That be eating.
Say it again. So again, it could be a command form for eat it, but I don't think, because atcha is food, cha is a command form of a verb to eat it, but I don't think that's what we have here, so we have a homonym.
Is it
Eating.
like the not the exaggeration, but like the emphasis?
Like the tree.
Yes, it's a particle that we usually translate as you see. It really kind of puts emphasis on something. Gonna cheese cha. So it's a little particle that puts emphasis on the word that was said right before it.
And
Sleep.
it's usually at the end of a word?
It just comes after the word that you're giving emphasis to. So it's kind of depends on context, and so just keep an eye out. Like this is one of those ones where I would say like keep an eye out for it in terms of how to use it. Like, and when you're trying to really sort of like sleep, you see, and what I'm asking you to do is like think about sleep now before I say the next thing, and that's really what cha tends to do. And now we got.
Sometimes I think it gets used like verily or like truly or
Yes, yeah, I can, right? Yewecha, or you can say yechawe. So it can combine like yewe, that's how it is. Yechawe, that's really how it is, right? So it just gives a little bit of emphasis to whatever you're talking about. Okay. So that gets us to here. So to sort of, okay, we've got this little thing that's attaching there. Okay. We have, let's find the stem.
Stem is yeah. Yeah.
So this is a suffix. It's not as common as a prefix. Almost every verb has a prefix. Every now and then, they'll get a suffix. So it's less common. So now we got there's probably,
Oh, is it like the make verb? Make or build?
it is like that. So if we go look at that verb, that's probably going to help us. So we're going to go get some help from the verb database. Which I think I didn't have open. Hold on. Let me open. And so before we go look at that, I just want to talk about one thing real quick. So if you go to tlingitlanguage.com, and if you go to Learning Tlingit and Advanced Tlingit, and if you scroll down a ways, let's see. So when we talk about this verb database that was made by Carrie Eggleston, like it's a really fantastic resource. We're going to use this a lot. By the end, once we get into springtime, I want you to think about how you're going to get off of that resource, though. It's sort of like you can't have the training wheels forever, but you have them right now. But at some point, you just got to think about when you're going to take that out. And just in terms of like, you don't need every verb to be conjugated for you, right? It's like, I cut up my kids' French toast still. Not all of them, the oldest one, just whole piece. But the little ones are like, and so I'll still cut it for them. But this thing, so this will take you to the website. You need the internet for this website. This is a version of that you can download directly onto your computer and open it with a web browser. So you do not need the internet to use that version. It's an XML file, so you just have to keep track of where you save it, but then you can open it. And so it's a little faster. It doesn't have to refresh. It doesn't need the internet connection at all. So if you're taking your computer out in the bush to go to your immersion camp, then download it and you'll have it with you. Because it's a great resource.
Is it ever updated or is it pretty much done?
I think she might have updated hers a year or two ago.
I clicked download and it says page not found.
Uh-oh. Oh no, okay. I will fix it. I'll fix it tonight. Thank you. I'm glad you tried it.
Is that in classic Lingít text? Where is that?
What's that?
Resources, advanced materials?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's right there. Okay, so let me, before we go forward, I'll put a link in the chat that should work if you folks want to download it. Okay.
I already have this.
Okay, so we're looking for this yech. So we're going to scroll all the way down to the y's, way down the bottom. When you're looking in the dictionary, you ever sing like little parts of the alphabet song? I usually do for W because I can never remember where W is. Okay, so here's yech. We see there's two of them. This is the first one. This verb is for whittling or making kindling. It's for making something. And then we see the making something as the exact same theme, but with this capital N and this underline X. That means there was a noun with that little underline X suffix attached to it, which is what we have here. Bizich, kutrayech. That means this is our verb. as we go through now, we might say, well, is there any of them that have this extra underline X at the end of the verb? If you go through, there sure is, right at the bottom. This is a repetitive mode for a zero conjugation verb. It will have the underline X as a suffix. We'll learn about the rest, we'll learn about others later, but if you want to say atch, they use that regularly. So you could say they regularly use the Tlingit language. You can use it like that. You can probably find it conjugate, like if you just took this part off, I bet you that's what you're going to find at the bottom of this one. Oh, it's not there. There. You could probably say it. Okay. So now we know it's to regularly use something, but there's two definitions for this verb. It's to make something into N. So this is kind of complicated. To use the object for N. Like, what does this mean? Like, let's just copy this. We'll go back to our notes. And just like talking about Tlingit and like, what does this stuff mean though when we start to use it? The subject does the verb. The object has the verb happen to it or them. And then this letter N is part of the preverb and what we call an indirect object. We have an indirect object right there. I will tell it to them, right? Because you could change this object. There's some objects that don't usually change, like eating. Eating is pretty much always a third person object, unless you're gonna like look at that little shrimp or whatever, the potato, say ikwaha. Or if you're a monster, there's a story about a monster who sit outside the village and said, Yiyach ikwasacha, or yiyach, no, like yach yikwasacha, there it is. I'm gonna eat you all up. I used to say it every night. So everybody ran away. But if you've got du'in ikwanik, you could say that. Du'in ikwanik. The situation here would be probably bad. Like this is one of those situations where like, it's really saying like, I'm gonna tell him about you. And that's like usually like, I caught you in the act of something and now I've got to go tell my friend how terrible you are. And so in this case, it's usually not a great thing once you become the object of this verb. Okay, so now, bizich yech. I'll give you a hint here. Sleep is doing the verb. So what do we do with the rest?
Sleep repeatedly makes people busy.
Yes. Sleep regularly or repeatedly. So like we say it's repetitive, but I think it's best to think of the interpretation as regularly. So sleep makes people busy. That's some Snoopy logic right there. And that's an advanced verb mode, right? So this is a fun little cute cartoon, but it's also something we could spend a lot of time with in terms of seeing what's there. Questions or thoughts?
Yeah, so it's basically like could you put like a verb in that noun place and make it like a verbal noun for that verb?
Well, I guess you could say yes. I mean, well, I'm not sure. Okay, so let's take a look at this verb for a second, because once you start going S-O-N, like it gets, now we're talking this code, which is the in-between language of English and Tlingit, which can be frustrating, but it really just exists to help us to nest these other things into our brain, which you know how to do these things in English. Like you know how to use indirect objects. but no one asks you to explain what they are. How, like when you learn a language from birth, you do not have to do that. You can if you want to, like if languages are fun for you or grammar is fun for you, but for some people, grammar is not fun at all, and I understand that. But let's take a look. So if you could say nadaq awleyech, which would be they made it into a table. If there's nothing else there, like that's what I would assume. But if you said wait nadaq awleyech, there are two ways to interpret this. They made a rock into a table, or they used a rock for a table. You would have to sort of specify, like there's a Raven story where they talk like, so he also used a rock for a chair.
Could you use teen to kind of specify a bit? Because I know, like, I think I read somewhere like, guashla teen ka awajak or something like that.
Yes, that's you can always do you can do verbs with things. So guashlatin, so I could say kuhidatin shachwachich. I clubbed them on the head with a pencil. So you could say that. It sounds not as horrible as like using a fish club. And you could do that even with this verb. So you could say chai teen nadaq awleyech. And in this case, they made it into something. Because just like the structure, so we have yellow cedar wood with, they made it into a table or used it as a table. But since you've got the teen in there, it's like, it seems like they used yellow cedar and made it into a table. But you don't have to, like, for this one, you would, I think 99% of speakers would just say that. But the reason, like, so we have a couple of different sort of funky things, like, I didn't know Snoopy was such a deep thinker. I didn't know his Tlingit was so good. I'll find him and maybe chat with him after class. But he does something fun. So, it's Nora's brain, right? And so Nora was very fun because she used to like to do stuff like this. So full on using English in these ways that are like a Tlingit multilingual pun, but then also using a pun here, but then using this sort of metaphorical phrase, which is, it makes people busy. So, okay. You okay? So thinking about, there's a couple things I want to sort of look at here. So one, if we have, let me get beyond that document. I think Snoopy took a little longer than I thought, which is great. So we will, if you can, so now that the audio link is up on our page, so thinking about our class page, over the weekend, this is what I would like you to do. So I can just plant a little seed here. So if you go to our class webpage, I will fix the broken link tonight. But one of the links that does work is right here. This is the audio for Hutz Chaya Kutikati what told by Yesh Nawu. If everything's working correctly, if you hit this button here, let me share my sound. It should play the audio.
Goed.
If you push this downward arrow, it should download the audio onto your device. But you might need to have a computer to do it. I'm not sure what it does for tablets or phones. But also the site is here. And if this doesn't work for any reason, reach out and I could send you the link, or I can just put it right now into the chat just in case. So, what are we going to do with this audio, with this story we've been sort of talking about? So one of the things that I would like us to do is to use this as sort of a story that's central to the remainder of our semester. So we're going to be coming into the story in certain ways and at certain parts. We're going to be using this as a listening exercise, as a way for us to sort of help get off of the books. And so a big part of our goal in this third year of Lingít study is to get ourselves so we don't need books. Every now and then we're going to have to look something up because we'll forget the word for, if someone will ask us for something and we'll just like, I forget what that duck is called, or I forget what that verb is. So there's a folder in our curriculum folder, which is fully accessible to everybody, and it's called Shkashnik. Within Shkashnik, there's a bunch of different stuff, and so maybe we'll walk through it on the website here. So if you click on this curriculum button, there's this link here that says, here's a link to all the materials which are collected in a Google folder. So if you click that, it's not going to work on this one. Hold on. Well, if you click that, it's going to bring you to a Google folder. Within that folder, there's a folder called Shkashnik. Within Shkashnik, there's a whole bunch of stuff, including collections of stories from a variety of different places. And then there's a folder called Hashuka. When you get into that folder, it says Hashuka. That's going to get you the audio for the stories, not for all of them, but for the ones I've been able to track down the audio in the book published by Nora Marks Downhauer and Richard Downhauer called Hashuka, Lingít Oral Narratives. So one of the things I'd like for you to do is to, and on our class website, this chapter is here. So here's the text of the book, or of the story, and then if you listen to the story, you should be able to just read along here on the left-hand side. The Tlingit will be on the right-hand side, or the English will be on the right-hand side. So what I think is a good approach for listening to stories like this is to just listen to it all the way through, maybe without even looking at this text, because your English brain is always going to want to follow along. And just sort of like let yourself listen to this 25-minute recording. And after you've done that, like take a break, go do something else, or go right back to it if you've got the time. And go ahead and read along with it and see what the Tlingit looks like when you hear it. So I think if I play this, you'll be able to hear it.
Shoot. Matach shaus gegaan. Ja, dat doe ik niet. Het is koude in die para. Matach kocht niet, dat kocht uit. Wat is het? Goed gedaan. Maar dat naar huis gegaan. Wat heb goed, dat was waar.
So then you're looking at the Tlingit. Then maybe read the English. Just read the English. Give your English brain that sort of, let it come up for air. It's probably going to feel like it's being held underwater for a whole hour. And then just sort of like, but then you can and then what you do from there is kind of up to you. But my recommendation would be take a break and then come back and listen to it and Tlingit again. Maybe without looking at any words. So maybe first time, don't look at any words. Second time, read the Tlingit, so you can just follow the Tlingit through. Then read the English. Then maybe the fourth time, or whatever, I'm losing count. Don't look at any text again. And just see, because like now you know what happens in the story, and let your brain like make those connections. And then go back and then just like really live in the story. It's a wonderful story. It's 2 songs in there. It is the first Tlingit story that was ever fully documented in terms of writing the whole thing out in Tlingit and translating the whole thing.
Which story is it called again?
Chutz Aya Chut Shawat. The woman who said something that offended the bears. Dalsa Kutla.
I listened to it 4 times today. And first I just listened to it without looking at anything. And the second time I had half a screen with the Lingít, which really helped because I could, he's such a fluent and speaker that he's not enunciating everything. If you know the language, you'll understand it. But if you're learning it, it's harder. And then I listened to it again, just straight. And then I actually read the English while I was listening to the Lingít, just so I could say, okay, I know I should be able to hear Tlein at some point. It's like, okay, I started to sensitize my brain to listen to sort of meaningful things in Lingít, I think. And I think that was somewhat helpful as far as feeling like I was getting into the story. I don't know if it would work for other people.
Yeah, I mean, like, Tlingit oratory is so interesting to use as a teaching tool because I think because of so many situations, like we don't have a lot of people to talk to. We probably spend a lot of our time in English. We have a highly endangered language that very few people speak. So I guess it'd be like sort of like bringing someone into an English as a second language class, and after they've been there for like a month or so, like taking them to a Shakespeare play, and saying like, learn from King Lear, and so it is the most elevated forms of Tlingit. There's a lot of stuff that goes on metaphorically, conceptually, grammar-wise, and so yeah, it's a big thing, which is why we also have a shortened version that's the one we're actually going to be pulling apart and translating fully. Xander.
Where is the directory where you found that text and the audio for it?
You could find both of them. There's 2 ways to get there. So I guess what I would recommend is on our class webpage, this is the text, and then this is the audio.
Okay.
And then I'll put links to both of those in the chat. What did I put in the chat so far? King Lear is in the chat. King Lear has entered the chat. Okay, let me put a link to the text just so you folks have it. Oh, there it is. And there's a second version, or there's another version by a different storyteller. Okay. So in addition to using this story as like a piece of whole language, and what I would like you to do is to listen to it a few times between now and Monday. And when we get together Monday, I would like you we'll start the class by each of you saying something about this story in Tlingit. I'm not going to give you any specific number of sentences to write, but one is probably kind of a little disappointing. And I'm not asking you to retell the story. I'm not asking you to make some sort of super metaphorical connection to your life. I just say something. It's an incredible story. It does exist in Koyakan. It exists in Haida. If you live in Sitka, there's a Haida totem pole from Kasan that is a very similar story to this. Like it's probably the same story that either traveled among the people or when all the people were together somewhere, they used to share it. I don't know. So that's sort of our whole language process, is looking at that. And then we're going through and we've talked about a preverb, right? And so thinking about these words that pop up before the verb, some of them affect the meaning, change the meaning of the verb. Some of them conjugate the verb. Like when you put hus in front of it or dach in front of it, those are very specifically tied to the verb. So it's a bit of a murky area for me, but some of them, like what this shows you is this yati verb. There's like 30 verbs built out of this one single verb that are all built by changing what's in the preverb. Some of them are adverbs, which modify the verb. So to do something slowly, carelessly, quickly, painfully, meanly. There's all kinds of things you could put in there. Evilly, they did something evil to me. Then we get into the object and just really sort of thinking about what is an object, what is an object. When we're talking grammar, this is usually the one that the verb happens to, right? And sometimes when we get into these things, I told it to them, right? So you might have an indirect object as well, which is saying this verb is happening to this thing, this is the thing that I am telling, and I am telling it to someone. And so you'll encounter different verbs, like you probably know what this verb is. If I said, what am I saying?
Help me.
Help me, right? And the achit is an indirect object. To me, right? I'm teaching it to you. So those things happen outside of the verb itself in that preverb area. Doing, do eat, do ide, those types of things. Did you folks have any questions about any of this stuff so far? Yes.
I had a question on the last paragraph of that same, on page 9. I had a hard time with that paragraph. What is that paragraph?
Object often contributes to contraction in the verb prefix, which is made up. Okay. So what this is talking about is we're going to get to this list of object preverbs. So when we look at them, some of them have this little hyphen off after it, right? I think only 2 of them do. That means it is always written as part of the verb. So you'll say, eu de huec, that's a single word. Eu de huec, eu de chech, right? So those things, whenever it's this particular one or this particular one, it is always written as part of the verb. Then we have 2 different types of ones that are written in front of the verb as a separate word. There's the ones that end with a consonant, chat, at, ush, and sh. Those will not affect the contraction of the verb. But these ones, so you'd say, chat, would de huec, right? I am tired. Would de huec, they are tired. How de huec. If it ends with a vowel, it will contribute to verb contraction in the prefix. So when we say contraction, what we are really talking about here is we'll say, go back to our notes, which I lost somehow. Oh, because there's Snoopy on it. Okay. So when we talk about contraction, like here's 2 examples right here. So this one, if we pull apart, we say there's chat in front of it. Let's just get rid of the chat actually. So I'm going to copy these and paste them. And I'll just say they will be tired. They are tired. So if I look at this one, I have a 0, which there's no sound, there's nothing there, so it does not affect the contraction of the verb. We just have to remember that there's something there. This is what the perfective marker looks like if we write it on its own. This is the classifier if we write it on its own. And then this is the stem if we write it on its own. So when we look at it, this changed to a W, which it does on the regular, but nothing got shortened. So when things get shortened, vowels start dropping, things start switching to other sounds or combining. Because here we have ga, ga, 0, da. Oh, wait. Zero's out here, sorry. Da, quick. So these three things. So when we start talking about verb contraction, you go to this root marker whenever you write it out. If you can count to 3 by the number of things, you're probably going to start to get contraction. 4, and you probably have to. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what happens here, in math, I guess you call it the order of events, right? I don't think we've really done this yet. When we say when these two, it's like we had a dog. Then we got another dog. And the older dog is not the boss dog. The younger dog is the boss dog. So if I were to put food down, I have to be conscious of the younger dog because she'll always come over and try to eat the other one's food, right? And if I said, there's just certain things too, there's certain behaviors. And so you have sort of like lead dogs and follow dogs. And you have that same thing here. So when you have ga, ga, the way that these are going to contract, I'll walk you through exactly what happens here. This vowel goes away. But because there's a vowel here, it can stay the letter G. It's fine. Other instances, if you take that vowel away, it turns into a K. Because we learned that a K can become a G. That happens. This one also goes away. But what's interesting is when you take the vowel away from ga, if it needs to change, if there's not a vowel that comes after it, it will go to the letter K. If you pull the vowel out of cha, or out of qa, sorry, especially that one, it will become an underline X. That's just how this stuff works. It's a very predictable thing, but it's just another set of rules that you will have to we don't have to, but you should sort of come to understand. So phase 1 would be those two vowels got to go away. Now we can start to contract something. So what happens, that changes into the underline X, and these two combine. That's how you get guchtegwek. So, when you have chetwedegwek, you don't have contraction, but you would hear ew, de, hwek. So that's why you get this. And then when you get into inland Tlingit, if you have to have vowel, the W, consonant, vowel. If you have that, and this is the classifier, that will become an M. That's the secret. Iude, iuche, iuche, any of those, iuche, or whatever that vowel is, that's where you can get the M. Not in other situations. You can't say mudechwek unless you're trying to be funny. Other questions?
So
I have a question.
why didn't the G turn into a K?
Because it took this vowel on. And so if there's a vowel that follows it, if it's a consonant. And so there are situations where that happens, right? So you say qokagut. So here you have, they are going to walk, right? So here you have ka, ka, third person, they. classifier, gut. Lots of things. There's lots of things in there. So gut. So what happened here? We can sort of walk ourselves through. We say, okay, so there needed to be contraction. So that guy, that vowel, that seems like a good vowel to cut, right? That vowel is not a boss dog, okay? But there's a vowel after it, no problem. If we say ade gut, this ends with a vowel. So that means there needs to be even more contraction. So now what you're going to get is you're going to get, and then this W pops up on the other side. That's why you go adequagut and gukagut, right? So this means that there's just an additional level of contraction. And so what happened here is we started with the same thing, but now we have to think of ade because it ends with a vowel. That means it's just going the Lingi is just going to treat it like part of that verb. It's just going to run right into it. And so now this goes away. This jumps over to the other side. Okay, I need to draw like a little arrow or something. So it happens. This is just part of the process. But now you don't have a vowel there, which means this must become the letter K. We'll do a whole bunch of this stuff, but even though like it's kind of it could drive you a little crazy, let it. It is extremely predictable. Like there's so much stuff. Like you'll see, there's a number of different things we'll see like this.
I have a couple questions. My first question is, when contractions happen, is it always the vowels that fall away?
The vowels fall and sometimes the consonants can change.
Okay. Yeah. But it always starts with vowels falling away.
Yeah,
and that starts the chain reaction of the consonants changing.
The logic behind it is that the vowels do a lot less work in Tlingit than the consonants do. So Tlingit's like, you just drop the vowel. It's just there to make a sound, to get us to the next consonant. We have so many consonants, and so those are where a lot of the meaning is. Jen.
Okay, and the next question is, why do we have to remember when things aren't there?
So that you know that if, like, for example, when you have things like would-de-huet, then you say, oh, well, how would I know to say chat would-de-huet, iw-de-huet? And so it's not like you need to note that there's something there, but you just have to remember that the pronoun is not here where the subject would be, but it's out here where the object would be. And so sometimes it also just helps us to just keep in mind of like when we change those, which one are we changing? So I think it's just part of a building block approach to saying like, here's these lists of pronouns. And there's really, like 5, let's see, cha, tu, I, y, 0, de. There's 6 subject pronouns. And then maybe about 10 object pronouns. So there's 16 to sort of choose from. But for me, I like people to just see which wheel you're spinning. And then to know that there's a classifier there, so that if you'd said wugut, now what you've got is perfective, third person, classifier, and gut. But it does get tricky because like you've got these 2 zeros right in a row. But what we sort of try and train our mind to do as we're learning Tlingit structure is to say that's got to be the classifier because the root is right there. And if you've got a 0 right there, that's got to be the subject because we've got these 3 things in the conjugation spot, which is why we're sort of reading this book that talks about these components. Other questions, thoughts?
In the thematic section, I forget exactly what it calls it. It says thematics are like are nouns, incorporated nouns. Are all thematics like kind of like not echoing, but like referencing like a noun?
Well, when you look at the list of them, and so here's a list of your most common one. I would say no. But in the so you for the thematic, I would start to say it's a noun that you could put on a verb. But then some of them are sort of relational nouns. Like so, the big one that I think about is ka, not this ka, but not that ka, but this ka. The last one, which is a horizontal surface, which means to like. For some of them, it makes sense. So if you say a kaushechit, they made furrows on it, which is what it's literally saying, but they wrote on it, right? And so it's on the surface of something. So that makes sense. But some of them, when you say a kawanik, that's got this ka on it. I don't know why there's a horizontal surface there to tell someone something. I guess the information goes across some sort of plane. So, yes, but when we get into this second spot, most of them, almost all of them, are just straight nouns. So you see like hand, nose or a point, voice or a neck, head. So they alter the meaning by building a noun in there, but some of them are more sort of conceptual things like around or about, telling news, like that's not really a noun. And so, and then time, I guess, is a noun. So,
Yeah.
but some of them don't relate directly to the noun form, I guess.
I mean, I was just kind of thinking ku is is that referencing like kuti for weather?
Yes. So k is one of my favorite things in Lingít. So you see it, we start sort of noticing it in verbs like kudzati and kuwati, and they talk, and so sometimes it's talking about the weather. Kushaguz, it's always talking about the weather. But then if you say kudzati, now it's kind of not. Where you say akakukwashi, I'm going to go look for it. So we call it the aerial, and it does usually one of two things. It refers to either some just sort of given space, some sort of area, or the weather. But with k, one of the cool things about it, and why I think about this word a lot, is because it's also in kunach, kudach, kut, kude, and probably in kuch. And the vowels do kind of interesting things, but like I guess we'll do like kind of okay, so we've got, what does kunach mean? What's the meaning of kunach?
Very,
Very.
I might say
very.
really.
Uh-huh.
Those are very similar things, but if you say like kunach Lingít X, like they're a real Lingít, a real human being. But then you have k. But then if we look at like, well, what is it? It's made out of k and nach, which is roughly through k, whatever k is. And what is kudach? How do we interpret that?
Too much?
Too much.
Much.
So now we go k and dach, which is from k. What about kut?
Return. Oh, no, sorry.
Is it like
Lost. So now you've got k and t, which is arrived at k. And then we'll do kuch first, I guess.
Let's return.
Return.
Go back.
As like a concept, not like the back of something. So then you have repeatedly at kuch or moving at kuch. And what about kudei, which is the least common of the group?
To oblivion?
So here you've got kuch and day, which is towards kuch. So as we sort of like look at Lingít, I do believe this is the same kuch in all of these examples. The one that is different is when you say, well, that one, like kushayech, makes people busy. That one's just a straight object pronoun. So when we get into these verb components, like a lot of things in Lingít, there are going to be moments that are a little bit confusing because here's a ka that's comparing two things, and there's another ka, which is spherical, and another ka, which is horizontal. I think you can only have two, though. I don't think you can go horizontal and spherical. So it's kind of flat and round, sort of a thing. I don't know. But these will, here's one of the things to really know when you're talking about these thematic prefixes. Not every verb has them. It's something that some verbs need to have them. But if you add one or take one away, it's a different verb. Okay.
Okay. Does that mean you can make a different verb that easy?
Yes. And I don't know if that's this is why it gets tricky and why I don't think we'll ever document every Tlingit verb that exists, because we don't know if you can just keep on adding them to all the different verbs. And some of them we know. We already know and it makes sense. So like you could say wune, ausene, jiwune, right? It happened, somebody did it, somebody worked. Right? So sometimes it shifts the focus of the action, right? And sometimes it sort of talks about, sometimes you could have like utag, they bit down on it, right? With their front teeth, right? And then you could have kakatagka. So tagka is a biter, like a mosquito. Kakatagka is these two surfaces biting together, and that's a pair of pliers.
Could you use that for gears?
For what?
For cogs, like gears?
I think you could. Yeah, like maybe whoosh tukhi, kachucha. These
Like
wheels that bite each other.
maybe for like a component side of a transmission for describing a gearbox or something.
Yeah, because they have teeth, right? So the other thing with and we'll talk about this stuff more next week. So next week we're going to look at this bear story. We're going to keep looking at examples of Lingít, and we're also going to start talking about a conjugation prefix. And so we're going to start looking at a lot of examples too. And so the idea here is for you to read these chapters and to really think about this, bring your questions. And I don't want you to feel like, well, we moved on and I don't understand this thing yet. But we need to sort of like get through this part so we can see all of these things and how they interact with each other. Because they do so in terms of meaning and use, and also in the way that they contract. Because if you add things, that's going to be more things. So the thematic prefix has 4 different spots. That means you could technically have up to 4 of them. But like whenever I think of these things, it's like it's a wheel with only a certain number of things on it, like a combination lock. So this could be, you could have, whoops, this is the wrong chart. So you could have one of these two, but not anything else on that first spot. This one's got a whole bunch of them. And there's even more that aren't listed here. This just lists the ones that I think are most common. This one I think only might have two things on it, and this one I think only has one thing on it. So that's a lot. It's a big language. You all are very smart, capable people, and you can understand all of this stuff. And it will contribute to language use, but there's these awkward phases where you like have to very in a very mechanical way sort of do things, but I do think it leads to you can naturalize these processes over time. Anything before we go? So listen to the story, read the story, think about grammar, but don't let it keep you up at night, because it's just a tool in our toolbox. It's not like there's no gate that's closed. There's no one who's gonna speak harshly to you because you used the wrong conjugation prefix. We're just gonna like play around, mess around, figure stuff out. Cheesh.
Tia, quase a ti.
Yay, yay, quase tudo.
Cheers.